Maple has been getting a ton of quality of life. It has kind of been like a theme over the last 2 years. And despite that, there are still some areas of the game that I think we maybe really need to focus on. Some of the problems that I'm going to bring up on this list may seem small, but everything that I've included on this list is something that I think is relatively easy to implement, yet will have a significant positive impact on the player experience and helping more people play this game. So with that out of the way, let's get right into the list. Skill notes, a system that some of you may actually not even know exists. It really is an amazing idea, and I really want it to be better because I believe that right now in its current iteration, it is near worthless. The short of it is, you pick an ability, you put it on a note, and when it's turned on, it makes a sound effect and a little pop-up in the bottom right of your screen that indicates, hey, this skill is off cooldown and you can use it again. It really is an amazingly useful feature if you can actually take advantage of it. You see, it has two main problems. One, the sound effect that is played is linked to the main sound effects volume slider, which controls things like hitting a boss. As an example, here's a boss fight where sound effect volume is maxed out and skill effect volume is about 40%. Most other things pretty low as well. Yeah, you can barely hear it, and it's kind of stuck in the bottom right of your screen. Not exactly a spot we are looking at most of the time in boss fights. Now, the feature itself is a 10 out of 10. However, what it needs, not only for myself, but especially for anyone who is visually or hearing impaired, maybe even people who just don't even have speakers, is one, the sound effect needs to be on its own volume slider. I quite frankly need that sound effect to be about 5 times louder than anything else going on in the game for me to even have a chance at hearing it. As for the visual side, either make it several times larger or allow us to actually customize where it is and how big it is. Either of those changes would be great, but both would be best, because really this is an accessibility feature, and right now I just think it's failing at its job. Number 2, let us resize and move any aspect of the MapleStory UI as well as the font size within them. Right now we can pick through 2 predetermined sizes, one that is reasonable for your aspect ratio and the other that is truly gigantic in most cases. There's not a whole lot to say about a feature like this. It's very basic but very impactful for those who need it. Number 3, allow us to lock the hotbar in the bottom right of your screen. Now, why would you want to do this, you might be asking? This isn't about accident protection. Instead, I would like a new feature added where if your hotbar is locked in the bottom right and you have an ability that has a right-click action customization, well, with this feature you would be able to right-click it on and off on your hotbar instead of having to open up your skill book. For most classes, they have one that they basically turn to the way they like it and they never touch it again. But there are a few classes in this game that like to switch it on and off whether they're grinding or bossing. Number 4, I am begging you, please allow us to fusion Anvil gendered gear onto non-gendered equipment like CRA. In that same vein, please also allow us to put an overall on a top and just look, there are dozens, tons of iconic old MapleStory armors that we just can't use anymore because pretty much every single one of them is gender locked, or they're an overall that just literally cannot be used even if you took the gender requirement out of them. The Fusion Anvil is one of the best damn cash shop cosmetics ever released, and the fact that we can put any class's hat on any other class is endlessly cool. I love that, but without all the other armor to accompany it, it feels like a very sad system. Ideally, I would say just remove all gender requirements from armor. Let us go crazy with the Anvil system. Y'all make a ton of money. MapleStory vets like myself will be happy. We'll probably buy tons of Anvils trying to make all our characters look the way they used to be. You know, we get so many permanent cosmetics for free, and that's fantastic. I love that, but getting that real classic look, that's something that we can't do right now. Number 5, just completely abolish the cache inventory system. This is an absolute terrible, outdated system, and it is very consumer unfriendly. Let me tell you this, I believe wholeheartedly with my zero market research available that this system is losing you money. And this is coming from a person who has bought 2 vac pets, one for explorers and one for Cygnus Knights. But for every person like me that you get with this horrible system, there are dozens who refuse to buy anything because they just don't want it stuck on one character, because maybe they main something like an Adele, but maybe that's the only class in that little pocket that they enjoy. And I can tell you from my own experience that all this system does is really make it unappealing to play anything that is not an Explorer or a Cygnus Knight. I think, hey, maybe I would really enjoy leveling a mechanic right now, but I think back to what it was like to looting before I had a vac pet, and the joy of even playing that class is already dead in the water. It's a system that unfortunately has a lot of power over me. Maybe not everyone is like me, but I do do believe there are a lot of people who will write off a class because they don't like any of the other classes that share a cash op inventory with it, and that actually just does devalue any purchase that they make, because if they ever quit that character, well, it's stuck on there until a cash transfer comes along, which leads to the compromise. The system doesn't have to be removed. Instead, cash transfers could just be more frequent and more reliable. If there was one at the end or beginning of every single month, that really wouldn't be so bad. I think most people would be content with that because it's not a long time to wait, but it's probably still enough to get maybe a few extra purchases out of some impatient people. And that's what we call compromise. Number 6, going back to gameplay with this one, particularly keybinds. Now, this one is a constant battle. We were given the combo key, which is a fantastic thing, although we need more than one. While this improvement is going on, we also have 6th job growing, which is giving us more keybinds very slowly, but some classes just don't even have enough as is. What do we do about it? This is a really tough one because you can't just add more keys to the keyboard, although you kind of can. For starters, maybe add a blank pad where we can add whatever keys we want in case our keyboard has extra keys, or just add the numpad there because there are a lot of extra keys there that are easily accessible from the arrow keys, you know, like 7, 4, 1, 0. Another thing that you should just do anyway is give us more combo keys. The combo key is fantastic. I just want more of them. I would like one for my burst, maybe one for the old F1 to F7 emotes, because it makes me a little sad having to remove those, but I have no room for anything, so I gotta, you know, maybe whatever else I want, because one is great, but more is better. Start making things like Maple Warrior a passive and no longer a buff. Back in the days when it was really hard to get a Maple War 30 book, it made sense to be able to cast it and buff your friends with it. But honestly, nowadays, it just takes up one thing on our pet's auto buff, which is another problem I'll get to soon, and potentially on your keyboard if you don't have enough room in your auto buff, which sadly many classes don't. Yet another thing that ends up taking up space on our bar in one way or another for some classes is decent holy symbol. An absolute requirement in all kinds of content. When you're grinding, it's on 24/7 unless you are a bishop or potentially a phantom, but in bossing, you may only need it when you're breaking the boss's chest, but it's still something you need. I think it is time to make this a toggle. While we're here, let's just throw number 7 in here because it is very related to keybinds, and that is make toggles persist through logging out of the game. Quite frankly, I don't know if this one is technically possible, but I would like to believe it is. And if we did this, honestly, most toggles would only need to be toggled on once and then never again. Some you might want off at some point, but for the most part, you're probably just going to leave it on forever. And that way you don't need to put it on your bar. You can actually just open up your skill book in the rare chance that it gets deactivated in some way. And I suppose at that point, you can just say that any toggles that have no business ever being turned off, like, you know, something like Demon Slayer's Blue Blood, why isn't that just a passive? It's not like there's a time where you want less final damage. Even if you're carrying somebody, you can just kind of stop attacking for a little bit. Number 8, pet auto buff. I think it's time for a little rework. Decent skills are taking up a lot of room in our auto buffs, and you know what? That's totally fine. I don't really have a problem with that. The only time I have a problem with it is when a class has too many buffs and you have to start manually casting them. And while it's not the end of the world to manually cast a couple buffs, it is also very easy to forget them if you are used to classes that don't have to do that. So, the solution that I am proposing is that pet auto buff be vastly expanded. For each of your 3 potential pets to be able to cast 3 buffs would probably be enough for almost every class in the game, but I have to imagine that there's at least one class out there who might need as many as 12. I don't know for sure, but I know some classes like Dark Knight have quite a few things that can be added as auto buff. However, my ideal solution and rework would just be an entire rework to the system, and that when you have a pet with auto buff, there is some kind of toggle in your skill book that you can basically click it, kind of like the inventory lock thing, go over to the skill, hit it, and basically indicate this as an auto buff, and you can do that to as many things as you want. Number 9, remove link skill limitations. The limitation that I was speaking of is the 4 free transfers a day and then the option to pay to do more than that. I think it's a really outdated system that just doesn't really serve any good purpose nowadays. I think this is a system that particularly hurts newer players who are maybe a little bit indecisive or maybe have a lot of little small things they want to get done in a day. And I think most veterans, it's nothing more than an annoyance and something that we just kind of have to plan our weeks around needlessly. I don't like having to think of like when I'm going to link, when I'm going to do what boss mules, I would just like it if I could link as many in one day if I wanted and do all my boss meals at once. Number 10, controller support. I know. I just talked about key binding issues, and controllers have a very limited number of buttons. That doesn't change the fact that a controller is a very useful tool to have. Grinding is a very lengthy activity. Sometimes it can really hurt your fingers. My fingers hurt all the time as they have some unknown problem. There is technically controller support in the game, but trust me, I've tried to make it work and it is not very good. It needs a lot of work. Work that I think is worth doing. You know, a lot of people aren't going to use a controller support, but it is, again, a nice accessibility feature. Not everyone can operate a keyboard and mouse comfortably. And when MapleStory is a game where you are sometimes grinding for like hours on end with literally only pressing a few buttons, controller is perfect for that scenario. Sit back in your chair, have your controller, and grind to your heart's content.